We continue now at the top of Daf Ayin Tes Amud Aleph in Meseches Nedarim. This is Nedarim Daf 79a. And the previous Amud Rabbi Chanina said that let's say a husband is silent, but he's doing it just to annoy his wife. So that's not really considered a silence in which he only has 24 hours to annul her vows. Rather, he can even annul her vows later on, since the silence was no indication of upholding the vow. It was just done in order to annoy his wife. And so the Gemara now is in the middle of asking on Rabbi Chanina from a Brisa, because the Brisa talks about the fact that there's chumras by hakim, there's chumras by upholding a vow more stringent than by annulling, and also the other way around. There are stringencies by annulling a vow that don't apply to upholding a vow. And the Gemara is now going through the stringencies by upholding a vow. Shahashtika mekayemes, because silence, that's able to be mekayem a vow, that's able to uphold a vow, even the silence. V'ein shtika mevatelos, but you can't use silence in order to nullify a vow. And similarly, kayim belibo, kayim, if a person upholds the vow in his heart, that's considered upholding the vow. But hafer belibo eino mufer, but if a person is annulling the vow in his heart, that's not considered an annulment. Kayim ein yachol lahafer. The Brisa also says that if a husband, let's say, upholds the vow, he can no longer annul the vow. And hafer ein yachol lekayim. Let's say the husband annuls the vow, he can no longer uphold the vow. In any case, the point is that the proof from the Brisa is as follows. Katani, what does it teach in this Brisa? It says shahashtika mekayemis. It says that shtika, silence, is mekayim the vow. It upholds the vow. Ma'ilab b'shosek al manas l'meika. Doesn't the Brisa mean to say, even in a situation where the person is quiet just in order to annoy her, that's why the husband is being quiet, that also counts as a kiyum, that also counts as upholding the vow? And to that the Gemara says, lo, no, that's not necessarily what the Brisa means. B'shosek al manas l'kayim. It could be the Brisa just means that the husband is being silent in order to uphold the vow. But the Gemara says if that's the case, so hainu kayim belibo kayim. That's the same as the other line in the Brisa. The Brisa already says that if the person upholds the vow in his heart, so then it's considered upheld. So rather, ela b'shosek stam. Rather, what you can say is, when the Brisa here says that shtika is mekayemis, it's talking about the person's being silent with no intention one way or the other. It's shosek stam. That's considered to be a kiyum. That's considered to be upholding the vow. But there's no proof necessarily to a situation of shosek al manas l'meikat. And the Ran over here explains there was one line in the Brisa, Kayim en yachol lahafer, hafer en yachol lakayim. It said if he upholds the vow, he can't annul it. If he annuls it, he can't uphold it. Laham milsa lo chamira hakama me'afara. The Ran just points out this is not a stringency, even though we're listing stringencies of hakama from hafara. This is not a stringency of upholding rather than annulling. V'lo hafara me'akama. It's not a stringency the other way either. It's actually saying that they're equal. V'lav mishum chomer naktinu. This line in the Brisa is not trying to teach a chumra. Elakevan dashminan dine hakama. Once the Brisa is teaching us laws relating to upholding and annulling the vow, mani hanami bahadayu. So we list this halach as well, but it's not related to any stringency. And in any case, the Gemara continues, Eshkechan chomer b'hakim mi b'hafer, b'hafer mi b'hakim mi nolan. So we find these stringencies that apply by upholding rather than annulling, but where do we find stringencies that apply to annulling that don't apply to upholding? And to that the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Yochanan says, Nishalin al hakim, we're able to ask, when a person upholds the vow, he can ask and undo that upholding. Ve'ein nishalin al hafer. However, you cannot ask, you cannot undo the annulment. Once a vow is annulled, it is annulled. That cannot be undone. And the Gemara continues, Meseches Rav Kahana. Rav Kahana asks a question from the following Brisa. The pasuk says, Vim hacharesh yachresh lo isha v'gomer. It says that let's say her husband is silent. V'shosek al manas l'meikat hakasa medaber. The pasuk is talking about a husband who is silent in order to annoy her. Ata omer v'shosek al manas l'meikat, oeno ella v'shosek al manas l'kayim. You say that it's talking about he's being silent in order to annoy her, but maybe it's talking about where he's being silent to be mekayim, to actually uphold the vow. Kishehu omer ki hecharish la. When the pasuk already says ki hecharish la, hare v'shosek al manas l'kayim hakasa medaber. The pasuk already mentions the idea where he is silent in order to uphold the vow. Hamani mekayim im hecharish yachrish la isha. So therefore, what does the pasuk mean when it says im hecharish yachrish la isha b'shosek al manas l'meikat hakasa medaber? The Brisa says explicitly that the pasuk is talking about where he's silent in order to annoy her, and you see that's also considered silence, and that also upholds the vow. And the Gemara says to Yufta, indeed this Brisa is going to be a refutation of Rabbi Chanina. We see that shosek al manas l'meikat is the same as any other kind of silence. But the Gemara continues, V'lukim ha b'shosek al manas l'kayim, ha b'shosek stam. Why doesn't the Brisa say that if it mentions silence twice, one time it's talking about silence in order to uphold, and one time it's talking about silence stam with no intention, and therefore the Brisa should learn nothing about shosek al manas l'mekat? And to that the Gemara answers, Kroi yisei riksivi. There are extra psukim, there are more extra psukim regarding silence. That's how we even know silence al manas l'mekat. The Mefarish explains, Kroi yisei riksivi midichsiv hacharish yacharish kama pa'am. It says hacharish yacharish several times. Shma mina b'shosek al manas l'mekat eino mefer. That tells us even shosek al manas l'mekat, that also is considered silence. He's no longer able to annul. Inyan acher, another explanation of what the Gemara means when it says there's many mentionings. Kroi ksivi hacharish yacharish v'chi hacharish. It says hacharish yacharish and ki hacharish. Hare gimel, so it really mentions it 3 times. Chad b'shosek al manas l'kayim, v'chad al manas l'mekat, v'chad b'stam. One time it's talking about shosek al manas l'kayim, one time it's talking about al manas l'mekat, one time it's talking about stam. So all 3, they're all considered identical. And the Gemara continues, Mesiv Rava asks the following question from a Mishnah. Nodra im chasheich, it says on Shabbos, let's say she makes a neder and it's getting dark. Mefer la ad shelo choshcha, he's able to annul the vow for her until before it becomes dark. Shim lo hafer v'choshcha, eino yachal lo hafer. If he doesn't annul it and it becomes dark, so it's too late, he can no longer annul the vow. And so the Gemara says, Amai, why should that be the case according to Rabbi Chanina? Lahavi keshosek al manas l'mekat. That should be no different than being silent in order to annoy her. In other words, the reason why he's waiting is out of respect for Shabbos. His silence doesn't indicate anything. And according to Rabbi Chanina, that shosek al manas l'mekat, he's still able to annul the vow after that day. Here also he should be able to annul the vow after that day. And the Gemara says, Tiyufta, indeed this Mishnah is a refutation of Rabbi Chanina. And the Gemara continues, Mesiv Ravashi. Ravashi asks a question also from a Mishnah. The Mishnah says, Yodeya ani sheyesh nedarim. Let's say the husband says, I know that these are vows that she made. Aval eini yodeya sheyesh mefirin, but I didn't know there's a concept of annulment. So Yafir, so the Mishnah says he's still able to annul the vows in that case. Even if it has been longer than a day, that does not pose a problem. However, Yodeya ani sheyesh mefir, and let's say he says, I know there's a concept of annulment. Aval eini Yodeya shazen neder, but I didn't realize that this was a neder. So there we have a machlokas tanoim. Rabbi Meir Omer lo yafir. Rabbi Meir says he can no longer annul the vow once a day has passed. V'chachamim Omer yafir. The chachamim say he still can annul the vow. The Mefarish explains, Aval eini Yodeya shazen neder choshev v'tzarach levadlo. I didn't know that this was a neder that was important, that needed to be annulled. So Rabbi Meir Omer lo yafir, again Rabbi Meir says he can't annul. Tekevan de yada de nadra v'yesh mefir, and since he knew that she made the neder, he knew there's a concept of annulment. Kishmiya ba'al madami, it's like he heard it. V'boilei l'mefer meikara, he should have done it originally. Once the time has passed, he can no longer annul it. V'chachamim omrim yafir achshav, the chacham say no, he could still annul it now. Tekevan de lo yada mitchila dahay neder tzarech hafara, since he didn't realize that this neder needed hafara. Kamisha shama achshav dami, it's as if he heard it right now. V'lo lechatchila, there wasn't a chance to do it earlier. And the Gemara continues, V'amai, why does Rabbi Meir say that he cannot annul the vow if he says he didn't realize this was a neder that needed to be annulled? Lahavi keshosek al manas l'mekat, it should be no worse than silence in order to annoy her. Again, the reason for his silence was not because he was being mekayim the neder, it was for other reasons, and therefore, according to Rabbi Chanina, he still should be able to annul the vow. And again, the Gemara says to Yufta, this is a refutation of Rabbi Chanina's position. Hadron aloch nara hamaurasa, we will return to you parak nara hamaurasa. This is the end of the 10th parak of Meseches Nedarim. If you're enjoying these videos and this channel, please like, share, and subscribe. And please take a look at the description box below to see how you can support this channel. And we will now begin the 11th parak of Meseches Nedarim. And the Mishnah says, V'elu nedarim shumei, for the following are the kinds of nedarim that the father or the husband is able to annul. Devarim sheyesh ben inoi nefesh. We're talking specifically about vows that involve affliction. For example, im erchatz v'im lo erchatz, if I bathe, if I don't bathe. Im eskashet v'im lo eskashet, if I adorn myself, if I don't adorn myself. And we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Ayin Tes Amud Beis.